Chapter 29. When Morgan Leah was a boy, he often played in the crystal-studded caves that lay east of the city. The caves had been formed centuries earlier, explored and forgotten by countless generations. Their stone floors worn smooth by the passing of time and feet. They had survived the great wars, the wars of the races, the intrusions of living creatures of all forms, and even the earth fires that simmered just beneath their surface. The caves were pockets of bright luminescence, their ceilings thick with stalactites, floors dotted with pools of clear water and darkly shadowed sinkholes, and their chambers connected by a maze of narrow, twisting tunnels. It was dangerous to go into the caves. There was a very high risk of becoming lost. But for an adventure-seeking Highland boy like Morgan Leah, any prospect of risk was simply an attraction. He found the caves when he was still very small, barely old enough to venture out on his own. There were a handful of boys with him when he discovered an entrance, but he was the only brave one enough to venture in. He went only a short distance that day, intimidated more than a little. It seemed a very real possibility that the caves ran to the very center of the earth. But the lure of that possibility was what called him back in the end, and before long he was venturing even farther. He kept his exploits secret from his parents, as did all the boys. There were restrictions enough on their lives in those days. He played at being an explorer, at discovering whole worlds unknown to those he had left behind. His imagination would soar when he was inside the caves. He could become anyone or anything. Often he went into them alone, preferring the freedom he felt when the other boys were not about to constrict the range of his play acting. For their presence imposed limits he was not always prepared to accept. Alone, he could have things just as he wished. It was while he was alone one day, just after the anniversary of the first year of his marvelous discovery, that he became lost. He was playing as he always played, oblivious of his progress, confident in his ability to find his way back because he had done so every time before, and all of a sudden, he didn't know where he was. The tunnel he followed did not appear familiar. The caves he encountered a different foreign look. The atmosphere became abruptly and chillingly unfriendly. It took him a while to accept that he was really lost and not simply confused, and then he simply stopped where he was and waited. He had no idea what it was that he was waiting for, but after a time it became clear. He was waiting to be swallowed. The caves had come alive, a sleeping beast that had finally roused itself long enough to put an end to the boy who thought to trifle with it. Morgan would remember how he felt at that moment for the rest of his life. He would remember his sense of despair as the caves transformed from inanimate rock into a living, breathing, seeing creature that wrapped all about him, snake-like, waiting to see which way he would try to run. Morgan did not run. He braced himself against the beast, against the way it hunched down about him. He drew the knife he carried and held it before him, determined to sell his life dearly. Slowly, without realizing what he was doing, he disappeared into the character he had played at being for so many hours. He became someone else. Somehow, that saved him. The beast drew back. He walked ahead challengingly, and as he did so, the strangeness slowly vanished. He began to recognize something of where he was. A bit of crystallization here, a tunnel's mouth there. Something else, something more. And all of a sudden, he knew where he was again. When he emerged from the caves, it was night. He had been lost for several hours, yet it seemed only moments. He went home thinking that the caves had many disguises to put on, but that if you looked hard enough, you could always recognize the face beneath. He had been a boy then. Now he was a man in the beliefs of boyhood, had long since slipped away. He had seen too much of the real world. He knew too many hard truths. Yet as he climbed the stairs that curled upward through the rock walls of the cavern beneath Eldwys, he was struck by the similarity of what he felt now and what he felt then, trapped both times in a stone maze from which the escape was uncertain. There was that sense of life in the rock, Uhl Belk's presence stirring like a pulse in the silence. There was a sense of being spied upon, of a beast awakened and set at watch to see which way he would try to run. The weight of the beast pressed down upon him, a thing of such size that it could not be measured in comprehensible terms. A peninsula, a city, and beyond, an entire world. Eldwys was all of these, and Uhl Belk was Eldwys. Morgan Leah searched in vain for the disguise that had fooled him as a boy, for the face that he had once believed hidden beneath. If he did not find it, he feared, he would never get free. They ascended in silence, those who had come from Rampling Steep, the only ones left who could face the Stone King. Morgan was so cold he was shivering, and the cold he felt derived from far more than the chill of the cavern air. He could feel the sweat bead along his back, and his mind raced with thoughts of what he would do when the stairs finally came to an end and they were inside the dome. Draw his sword, the one of ordinary metal, yet whole. Attack a thing that was nearly immortal with only that. Draw his shattered talisman, a stunted blade. Attack with that. What? What was it that he was expected to do? He watched Quickening move ahead of him, small and delicate against Walker Bow's silver light, a frail bit of flesh and blood that might, in a single sweep of Uhl Belk's stone, hand scatter back into the elements that had formed it. Quickening gone. He tried to picture it. Fears assailed him anew, darts that pierced and burned. Why were they doing this? Why should they even try? Walker slipped on the mist-damp steps and grunted in pain as he struck his knee. They slowed while he righted himself, and Morgan waited for Uhl Belk to stir. Hunter and hunted, but which was which? He wished he had Steph to stand beside him. He wished for Pa Omsford, for Padishah Creel. He wished for any and all of them, for even some tiny part of them to appear. But wishing was useless. None of them were there. None of them would come. He was alone. With this girl he loved, he could not help, and with Walker Bow. An unexpected spark of hope flashed inside the Highlander. Walker Bow, he stared at the cloaked figure leading them, one-armed, escaped from the Hall of Kings, risen from the ashes of Hearthstone. A cat with many lives, he thought, the dark uncle of old, evolved perhaps from the invincible figure of the legends, but a miracle nevertheless, able to defy druids, spirits, and the shadow and live on. Come here to Eldwys to fulfill a destiny promised by the shade of Alanon, or to die. That was what Walker Bow had elected to do. Walker, who had survived everything until now, Morgan reminded himself, was not a man who could be easily killed. So perhaps it was not intended that the dark uncle be killed this time either. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of that immortality might rub off on him. Ahead, Walker slowed. A flick of his fingers and the silver light vanished. They stood silently in the dark, waiting, listening. The blackness lost its impenetrability as their eyes adjusted, and their surroundings slowly took shape. Stairs, ceilings, and walls, and beyond, an opening. They had reached the summit of their climb. Still, Walker kept them where they were, motionless. When Morgan thought he could stand it no longer, they started ahead once more, slowly, cautiously, one step at a time, shadows against the gloom. The steps ended and a corridor began. They passed down its left, invisible and silent save for their thoughts, which seemed to Morgan Leah to hang naked and screaming and bathed in light. When the corridor ended, they stopped again, still concealed within its protective shadow. Morgan stepped forward for an anxious look. The Stone King's dome opened before them, vast and hazy, and as silent as a tomb. The stands that circled the arena stretched away in symmetrical stair-step lines, a still life of shadows and a half-light that lifted to the ceiling. Its highest level, little more than a vague suggestion against the aged stone. Below, the arena was flat and hard, and empty of movement. The giant form of Uhl Belk crouched at its centre, turned away so that only a shading of the rough-hewn face was visible. Morgan Leah held his breath. The silence of the dome seemed to whisper the warnings that screamed inside his head. Walker Bow moved back to stand beside him, and the pale, hollowed face bent close so that the other's mouth was at its ear. Circle left. I'll go right. When I strike him, be ready. I shall try to cause him to drop the stone. Seize hold of it. If he does, then run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Don't stop for anything. The other's hand seized his wrist and held it. Be swift, Highlander. Be quick. Morgan nodded voicelessly. For an instant, Quickening's black eyes met his own. He could not read what he saw there. Then Walker was gone, slipping from the mouth of the corridor into the arena, moving to his right along the front wall of the stands into the gloom. Morgan followed. Turning left, he pushed aside his dread and gave himself over to the dark uncle's command. He passed across the stone like a wraith, quick and certain, finding a surprised reassurance simply from being in motion. But his fear persisted, a cornered beast within his skin. Shadows seemed to circle about him as he went, and the dome's silence hissed at him in his mind, a voiceless snake. His eyes fixed on the bulky form at the arena's centre, he found himself searching for even the smallest movement. There was none. Uhl Belk was a carved stone against the grey, still and fixed. Quick now, thought Morgan as he went. Quick as light. He saw Walker at the far side of the arena, a lean and furtive figure, nearly invisible in the gloom. Another few moments, he thought, and then quickening. He realized something, that in his haste to obey Walker, he had forgotten about the girl. Where was she? He stopped abruptly, casting about for her without success, scanning the rises, the tunnels, the shadows that had issued from everywhere. He felt something drop in his chest, quickening. Then he saw her, not safely concealed or well back from where they crept, but fully revealed, striding out from the corridor into the arena, directly toward the massive figure of Uhl Belk. His breath caught sharply in his throat. What was she doing? Quickening! His cry was silent, but the Stone King seemed to hear it, responding with an almost inaudible grunt, stirring to life, lifting away from his crouch, beginning to turn. Brilliant white light flared across the canopy of the dome, so blinding that for an instant even Morgan had to look away. It was as if the sun had exploded through the clouds, the grey haze, the stone itself, to set fire to the air imprisoned there. Morgan saw Walker Bow with a single arm raised, thrust out from his dark robes, the magic bursting from his fingers. Uhl Belk howled in surprise, his massive body shuddering, arms raising to shield his eyes, his stone parts grinding with the effort. Walker Bow leaped forward then, a shadow against the light, charging at the Stone King as the latter flailed ponderously at the painful brightness. Again his good arm raised, thrusting forth. An entire bag of Cargline's volatile black powder flew at Uhl Belk and exploded, hammering into the Stone King. Bits and pieces of the ragged body shattered into fragments. Fire burned along his arm to where his fist clenched the black elfstone. But still, he held the talisman fast. And suddenly Morgan Leah found that he could not move. He was frozen where he stood, just as had happened at the jut, when the creeper had gained the heights under cover of darkness and the outlaws of the movement had gone to meet its attack. He found himself paralyzed. All his fears and doubts, all his misgivings and terrors descended on him. They seized him with their clawed fingers and bound him up as surely as if he had been wrapped in chains. What could he do? How could he help? His magic was lost, his sword blade shattered. He watched helplessly as Uhl Belk began to turn, to fight past Walkerbo's assault, and to brush back his magic. The Dark Uncle renewed his attack, but this time he struck without the element of a surprise to aid him, and the Stone King barely flinched. Already the brightness of Walker's false sun was beginning to fade and the grey of the dome's true light to return. Walkerbo's words echoed tauntingly in Morgan's ears. "Be swift, Highlander. Be quick." Morgan fought through his immobility and wrenched free from its scabbard the broadsword he had wore strapped to his back, but his fingers refused to hold it. His hand would not obey. The broadsword slipped away, tumbling to the arena floor with a hollow clang. The Stone King's breath hissed as one monstrous hand swept out to seize Walkerbo and crush the life from him. The Dark Uncle had gotten too close. There was no chance for him to escape. Then suddenly he was gone, reappearing first as 2 images, then 4, and then countless more. Yeah, Omsford's favourite trick 3 centuries ago. The Stone King grabbed at the images, and the images evaporated at his touch. The true Walkerbo sprang at the monster, scattered new fire into his face, and slid nimbly away. The Stone King howled in rage, clawed at his face, and shook himself like an animal seeking to rid itself of flies. The whole of the arena shuddered in response. Fissures opened in jagged lines across the floor. The stands buckled and snapped, and a shower of dust and debris descended from the ceiling. Morgan lost his footing and fell, the impact of the stone jarring him to his teeth. He felt pain, and with the coming of that pain, the paralyzing chains fell away. The Stone King's fist came up, and the fingers of his hand began to open. The non-light of the elfstone seeped through, devouring what remained of Walkerbo's fading magic. The Dark Uncle threw up a screen of fire to slow the magic's advance, but the non-light enveloped it in a wave of blackness. Walker stumbled backward toward the shadow, chased by the non-light, harried by the fissures and the cracking of stone. Another few seconds, and he would be trapped. Then Quickening caught fire. There was no other way to explain it. Morgan watched it happen and still couldn't believe what he was seeing. The daughter of the king of the Silver River, less than 20 feet away from Uhl Belk by now, standing exposed and unprotected beneath his shadow, elevated like a creature made of air until she was level with the giant's head, then burst into flames. The fire was golden and pure, its blaze a cloaking of light, flaring all along her body and limbs, leaving her illuminated as if by the midday sun. She was, in that instant, more beautiful than Morgan had ever seen her, radiant and flawless, and exquisite beyond belief. Her silver hair lifted away from her, feathering outward against the fire, and her eyes glistened black within the gold. She hung there, revealed, all wondrous, impossible magic come to life. She is trying to distract him, Morgan realized in disbelief. She is giving herself away, revealing who she is, in an effort to distract him from us. The Stone King turned at the unexpected flaring of light. his already crumbled face twisting until his features virtually ceased to exist. The slash of his mouth gaped at the sight of her, and his voice sounded in anguish. Yo! Uhl Belk forgot about Walkabow. He forgot about the Dark Uncle's magic. He forgot about everything but the burning girl. In a frenzy of grinding stone limbs and joints, he struggled to reach her, surging up against the stone floor that welded him fast, grappling futilely for her, then, in desperation, bringing the hand that cupped the black elfstone to bear against her. His voice was a terrifying moan become a frenzied roar. The earth shuddered with the urgency of his need. Morgan acted then, finally, desperately, even hopelessly, surging back to his feet, his eyes fastened on Quickening and on the monster who sought to destroy her. He attacked. He went without thought, without reason, driven by need, armoured in determination he had not thought he could ever possess. He raced into the haze of dust and debris, leaping past the fissures and drops, speeding as if he were carried on by the strong autumn winds of his homeland. One hand dropped to his waist, and he pulled forth the shattered blade of his ancestors, the jagged remnant of the sword of Leah. Though he was not aware of it, the sword shone white with magic. He screamed the battle cry of his homeland. Leah! Leah! He reached the Stone King just as the other became aware of his presence, and the hard, empty eyes began to turn. He sprang onto a massive bent leg, vaulted forward, seized the arm that extended the black elfstone, and drove the shattered blade of the sword of Leah deep into its stone. Uhl Belk screamed, not in surprise or anger this time, but in terrifying pain. White fire burst from the shattered blade into the Stone King's body, lines of flame that penetrated and seared. Morgan stabbed Uhl Belk again and yet again. The stone hands trembled and clutched, and the stricken monster shuddered. The black elfstone tumbled from his fingers. Instantly, Morgan yanked free his sword and scrambled down in an effort to retrieve it. But the Stone King's damaged arm blocked his way, swinging toward him like a hammer. He dodged wildly, desperate to escape its sweep, but it clipped him anyway and sent him tumbling back, arms and legs flying. He barely managed to keep hold of his weapon. He caught a brief glimpse of Quickening, an oddly clear vision, her face, bright even though the magic of her fire had faded. He caught a snatch of dark motion as Walkabow appeared next to her out of the shadows. Then he struck the wall, the force of the blow knocking the breath from him, jamming the joints of his body so that he thought he had broken everything. Even so, he refused to stay down. He staggered back to his feet, dazed and battered, determined to continue. But there was nothing more to do. As quickly as that, the battle was ended. Walkabow had gained possession of the fallen elfstone. He braced the Stone King. The druid talisman clutched menacingly in his raised hand. Quickening stood beside him, returned to herself, the magic she had summoned gone again. As his vision slowly cleared, as his sense of balance restored itself, Morgan saw her again, and in his mind, all on fire. He was still astonished at what she had done. Despite her vow, she had used the magic, revealed herself to Uhl Belk, and risked everything to give them a chance to survive. The questions whispered at him then, insidious tricksters. Had she known that he would come to save her? Had she known what his sword would do? The gloom of the dome's interior returned again, the fading of the magic, cloaking Uhl Belk's massive form in shadow. The Stone King faced him from a cloud of swirling dust, his body sagging as if melted by the heat of his efforts to defend himself, still joined to the stone of Eldris in the chaining that had undone him. Try as he might, he had not been able to rise and break free. By choosing to become the substance of his kingdom, he had rendered himself virtually immobile. His face was twisted into something unrecognizable, and when he spoke, There was horror and madness reflected in his voice. "Give the Elfstone back to me." They stared up at him, the three from Rampling Steep, and it seemed none of them could find words to speak. "No, Uhl Belk," Walkerbow replied finally, his own voice strained from the effort of his battle. "The Elfstone was never yours in the first place. It shall not be given back to you now." "I shall come for you then. I shall take it from you." "You cannot move from where you stand. You have lost this battle, and with it the Elfstone. Do not think to try and steal it back. It is mine." The Dark Uncle did not waver. "It belongs to the druids." Dust geysered from the ravaged face as the creature's breath exploded in a hiss of despair. "There are no druids." The accusation died away in a grating echo. Walkerbow did not respond, his face chiselled with emotions that seemed to be tearing him apart from within. The Stone King's arms rose in a dramatic gesture. "Give the Black Elfstone back to me, human, or I shall command Eldwys to crush the life from you. Give the talisman back now, or see yourselves destroyed." "Attack me with those, or those with me," Walkerbow said, "and I shall turn the Elfstone's magic against the city. I shall summon power enough to shatter the stone casing that preserves it, and turn it, and you, to dust. Do not threaten further, Uhl Belk. The power is no longer yours." The silence that followed was profound. The Stone King's hand closed into a fist, and the sound of grinding rose out of it. "You cannot command me, human. No one can." Walker's response was immediate. "Release us, Uhl Belk. The Black Elfstone is lost to you." The statue straightened with a groan, and the sound of his voice was thick with weeping. "It will come for me now. The Morgrint will come. My son, the monster I have made, will descend upon me, and I shall be forced to destroy it. Only the Black Elfstone kept it at bay. It will see me old and wearied and believe me without strength to deflect against its hunger. It shall try to devour me." Depthless hard eyes fixed on Quickening. "Child of the King of the Silver River, daughter of he who was my brother once, give thought to what you do. You threaten to weaken me forever if you steal away the stone. The Morgrint's life is no less dear to me than your own to your father. Without him, there can be no expansion of my land, no fulfillment of my trust. Who are you that you should be so quick to take what is mine? Are you completely blind to what I have made? There is in the stone of my land a changeless beauty that your father's gardens will never have. Worlds may come and go, but Eldwys will remain. It will be better for all worlds to do so. Your father believes himself right in what he does, but his vision of life is no clearer than my own. Am I not entitled to do what I see as right, as the word has given me to see right?" "You subvert what you touch, Uhl Belk," the girl whispered. "And you do not. Your father does not. All who live within nature do not. Can you pretend otherwise?" Quickening's frail form eased a step closer to the giant, and the light that had radiated from her before flared anew. "There is a difference between nurturing life and making it over," she said. "It was to nurture that you were charged when you were given your trust. You have forgotten how to do so. The Stone King's hand brushed at the particles of light that floated from her body, an unconscious effort to shield himself. But then he drew his hand back sharply, the intake of his breath harsh with pain. No! The word was an anguished cry. He straightened, caught by some invisible net that wrapped him and held him fast. Oh, child, I see you now. I thought that in the Morgan I had created a monster beyond all belief. But your father has done worse than you. The rough voice gasped, choked as if it could not make the words come further. Child of change and evolution, you are the ceaseless quicksilver motion of water itself. I see in truth what you have been sent to do. I have indeed been stoned too long to have missed it. I should have realized when you came to me that you were madness. I am mired in the permanency I sought, and have been as blind as those who serve me. The end of my life is written out before me by the scripting of my own hand. Uhl Belk, Quickening whispered the name as if it were a prayer. How can you give what has been asked after tasting so much? Morgan did not understand what the Stone King was talking about. He glanced at Quickening and started in surprise. Her face was stricken with guilt, a mirror of the hidden secrets they had always suspected, but never wanted to believe she kept. The Stone King's voice was a low hiss. Take yourself from me, child. Go into the world again and do what you must to seal all our fates. Your victory over me must seem hollow and bitter when the price demanded for it's made so dear. Walkabow was staring as well, his mouth shaped with a frown, his brow furrowed. He did not seem to understand what Uhl Belk was saying either. Morgan started to ask Quickening what was happening and hesitated, unsure of himself. Then Uhl Belk's head jerked up with a sharp crack. Listen! The earth began to shudder, a low rumbling that emanated from deep within, rising to the surface and gathering waves of sound. Morgan Leah had heard that rumble before. It comes. The Moor grinned. Walker began backing away, yelling at Morgan and Quickening to follow. He shouted at the Stone King. Release us, Uhl Belk. If you would save yourself, do so now, quickly. Walker's arms lifted, threatening with the fist that held the black elf stone. Uhl Belk barely seemed to notice. His face had become more haggard, more collapsed than ever. A parody of human features, a monster's face grown hideous beyond thought. The giant's voice hissed like a serpent through the roar of the Morgrint's approach. Flee, fools. There was no anger in the voice, only frustration and emptiness, and something more. Morgan Lee thought in amazement. There was hope, just a glimmer of it. A recognition beyond the Highlanders' understanding, a seeing of some possibility that just transcended all else. A section of the dome's massive wall split apart directly behind them, stone blocks grinding with the movement, grey daylight billing through. Flee. Morgan Lee broke for the opening instantly, chased by the demons he did not care to see. He felt rather than saw the Stone King watch him go. Quickening and Walker followed. They gained the opening in a rush and were through, running from the fury of the Morgrint's coming, racing away into the gloom.